All right, so we are going to continue to see the modern art today. So, so the modern art is divided as two periods: before avant-garde and after avant-garde. So in the last meeting, we learned before avant-garde, realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, right? So today we are going to see the rest of part, the modern art movements after avant-garde, Fauvism, expressionism, cubism, futurism, Dada, surrealism, and idealism. So there are many art movements and artists. So before we take a look at all the art movements after the avant-garde, let's just see what the avant-garde is in detail. So, avant-garde was, originally a military term, as you can see here, referring to the detachment of soldiers that went first into battle. Avant-garde, which is a French term, means newest, latest, and the most advanced art. By the 1888s, younger artists began to refer to themselves as the avant-garde. So they were the boldest artists, going first into uncharted territory and wait for others to catch up. The newest and change became artistic ideals. Each generation, even each group, believed it was their duty to go further than one before. So the first art movement after avant-garde is Fauvism. In 1904, the artists of the Salon d'Aran organized a large exhibition of Cézanne, who is the father of modern art. And in 1906, they mounted a major retrospective of Gauguin, the post-impressionist artist. We saw his work in the last meeting. But the most notorious exhibit of the Salon d'Aran was the one they organized for themselves in 1905. It was then that a critic dubbed them fauves, like wild beasts. The artist who emerged as the leader of this wild new trend in painting was Henri Matisse. So this is a Henri Matisse painting. So it looks like he's using very bold color with the very thick outline. So let's see the different works of the artist. So Matisse was a French artist, and he was a draftsman, printmaker, and sculptor. But he's known primarily as a painter. And Matisse is commonly regarded, along with Pablo Picasso, as one of the artists who best helped to define the revolutionary developments in the visual arts throughout the opening decades of the 20th century, responsible for significant developments in painting and sculpture. So this is his painting. So everyone, please look at this painting together. Do you feel the wild beast through this painting? How do you think? How do you think about this work of art, everyone?
It seems very carefree. Everyone's naked, just enjoying themselves in the park.
Exactly. That's right. So as you can see, they're all, very, free to enjoy their time. Uh, very, colorful background. So during his 12 years, Matisse often painted landscapes in the south of France during the summer and worked up ideas developed there into larger compositions upon his return to Paris. So the title of this painting is The Joy of Life. This is the second of his important imaginary composition, and it is typical of this. He used the landscape he had painted in Courier to provide the setting for the idol, but it is also influenced by ideas drawn from Watteau, Pushkin, Japanese woodcut, Persian miniatures, and 19th century Orientalist images of harems. The scene is made up of independent motifs arranged to form a complete composition. The massive painting and its shocking colors received mixed reviews at the Salon des Independents. Critics noted its new style, like broad fields of color and linear figures. And this is another Henri Matisse painting, The Dance. The final version of The Dance has a very different emotional character. It has been described as forbidding, menacing, tribal, ritualistic, even demonic. Demonic. So feels like drum beats almost seem to be heard as the simple pleasure of the original is overwhelmed. Now let's see the Impressionism. So the Impressionism's fundamental purpose of art was to express their intense feelings toward the world. Expressionism describes any style where the artist's subjective feelings take precedence over objective observation. So I will share two Impressionist artists to show their subjective feeling to the world. The first artist is Edward Munch. The Edward Munch is best known as being a Norwegian born expressionist painter and printmaker. In the late 20th century, he played a great role in German expressionism and the art form that later followed, namely because of the strong mental anguish that was displayed in many of the pieces that he created. So this is his work. Munch recalled that he had been out for a walk at sunset when suddenly the setting sunlight turned the clouds blood red. He sensed an infinite scream passing through nature, and scholars have located the spot to a fjord overlooking Oslo and have suggested other explanations for the unnaturally orange sky, ranging from the effects of a volcanic eruption to a psychological reaction by Munch to his sister's commitment at the nearby lunatic asylum. And this is another expressionist artist, Vasily Kandinsky. He used to be a musician, so his work of art seems like very rhythmical. So Vasily Kandinsky was one of the pioneers of abstract modern art and exploit the evocative interrelation between color and form to create an aesthetic experience that engaged the sight, sound, and emotions of the public. So he believed that total abstraction offered the possibility for profound transcendental expression and that copying from nature only interfered with this process. And here's another his painting with the geometric shapes and the lines, very rhythmical and very musical. And let's move on to the next art movement after the avant-garde, Cubism. So Cubism is a style of painting and sculpture developed in the early 20th century, characterized chiefly by an emphasis on formal structure, the reduction of natural forms to their geometrical equivalence, and the organization of the planes of a represented object independently of representational requirements. So, this is a George Braque, the collage work. We learned this style of art before the midterm in the drawing chapter, and his friend, George Braque is also very famous Cubism, and his friend is also, very famous Cubist artist. Do you remember who is the artist? The Cubist artist, and he worked with George Braque, to create the Cubism and the collage style of art. Who's the artist?
Is it Picasso?
That's right. Very good. The most famous artist of Cubism is Pablo Picasso. So Pablo Picasso, probably the most important figure of 20th century in terms of art and art movements that occurred over this period. And because of the age of 50, the Spanish-born artist had become the most well-known name in modern art with the most distinct style and eye for artistic creation. So let's see this work of art together. Looks very interesting and very abstract painting, right? So this is Pablo Picasso's very aggressive style of Cubism painting. So everyone, look at this painting closer. And can you guess what the artist describes in this painting? What do you think? What can you see through this painting?
Houses.
Huh?
Houses.
Policies?
How
It looks like, building structures. I thought that, when I see this work of art at the first time, but it's not. So there is, something in the middle.
It looks like there's supposed to be a silhouette of a person or something there.
Yes, there is a person. There we go. Very close. And he's holding something. Let me give you a hint. He's holding a musical instrument.
A guitar.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Where is the guitar?
It's like in a weird setting, almost like right here.
Right?
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So you know what, everyone? See this painting closer? So this part is the head. And this part is torso, so shoulder, arm, and he's holding a guitar. So the Pablo Picasso described a guitarist. So he simplified all the body parts and reorganized them in this painting. Very good. So I'm gonna share a video to see this painting closer. So how he could create this very aggressive Cubism art style.
We're in the Pompidou Center in Paris looking at a painting by Pablo Picasso called The Guitarist from 1910.
This is what is often referred to as analytic cubism.
Analytic in the idea of taking something apart, analyzing the parts of something, and you can see that does look like a jigsaw puzzle where the forms have been disassembled.
It's an abstraction.
The further we stand back from the painting, the more I can see the forms of a man, a head, shoulders, elbows, the fingerboard of the guitar, the rounded forms of the outside of the guitar.
But I don't think that Picasso meant this to be a puzzle that we're supposed to put back together. Although Picasso is best known for abstracted paintings such as this, it's important to remember that Picasso was something of a child prodigy. He could draw in the academic style beautifully. For the previous 400 or 500 years, Western art had been preoccupied with naturalism, with representing the natural world as carefully and exactly as possible.
Representing the world as it appears to our eyes.
An artist developed a toolkit to do this. This included linear perspective,
Using light and shadow to create the illusion of three-dimensional form.
The problem that Picasso faced is that the modern world was one that felt ruptured. Old systems no longer felt valid.
The early 20th century is a time of tremendous upheaval. There is a sense that vision itself is unreliable.
Picasso was grappling specifically with the issue that painting was a kind of illusion, a representation of three-dimensional form and space on a two-dimensional surface.
A system of representation.
So could Picasso invent a new language for representation, but one that was not hiding the two-dimensionality of the canvas, but rather putting that in the forefront? So let's look closely at this painting and see if we can understand how Picasso has done this here. Picasso has simplified the human form.
We see diagonals, horizontals, vertical lines in black. We see circles that intersect.
But it's so abstracted that if we oriented it as if it were a landscape, we might expect to see the rooftops of a village instead of a man holding a guitar.
The fundamentals of perspective that governed Western painting for so long supposed a single viewer fixed in front of a work of art and showed us that view.
And Cézanne, in the late 19th century, had developed those ideas. Cézanne said, instead of standing in one place, looking from one point in space and time, I actually move around the thing that I'm painting.
Even if you don't move around it, what if you slightly turn your head to the right or to the left? The reality is that one's view is constantly changing and shifting.
And Picasso takes that idea and runs with it. What would happen if you represented this man holding a guitar over time from multiple perspectives?
That's a different kind of truth than the truth that Western painting had given us for 500 years.
So this is not less true, it's just differently true.
Picasso has also emptied the painting of much of its color.
And much of its content. We don't see hands, we don't see a face, we don't see emotion. The things that generally draw us into a painting of a person, what Picasso is interested in instead is the structural logic of the language that he's inventing. And he's inventing it not by himself, but with his compatriot George Braque.
And we still do have some illusion of space. There is a shallow relief here. We have light and shade. We have the movement between those pale tones and darker shadows. So there is a suggestion of a form there. This is not entirely flat, but it certainly is reminding us of the flatness of the canvas that this is painted on.
And as you said, he's reducing color so that we focus on line, on form, on mass, on structure. The colors are reduced to some browns and whites and blacks and perhaps some pale greens.
So we have light and shade that suggests three-dimensional form, and we have overlapping of shapes that also suggests depth.
But not deep space. This is a shallow space, maybe a few inches, just enough for the fractured forms that are represented. It's as if Picasso has taken a series of views of the human body and reconstructed them on the two-dimensional plane.
I find a tension between the title, The Guitarist, and the painting itself.
Without the title as a prompt, you'd be hard-pressed to locate the man or the guitar. This is a painting that is about the way that painting itself works. Picasso here is on the edge of abstraction, but this is not pure abstraction. It is not entirely divorced from the world that we see. Throughout his entire career, Picasso remained interested in the tension between what we see and the way in which we depict it.
Very interesting painting. So let's see, a little bit easier to see. So it's a large oil painting created in 1907 by Pablo Picasso. So this work is a part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in the New York City, called like MoMA. Um, it portrays 5 nude female prostitutes in a brothel on the Avenue. Each figure is depicted in a disconcerting, confrontational manner, and none is conventionally feminine. The women appear slightly menacing and are rendered with angular and disjointed body shapes. The 3 figures on the left exhibit facial features as the Iberian style of Picasso's native Spain, while the 2 on the right are shown with African mask-like features. The racial primitivism evoked in these masks, according to Pablo Picasso, moved him to liberate an utterly original artistic style of compelling, even savage force. So this painting looks very familiar with us. So on 26 April 1937, the Air Force of Nazi Germany bombed the Basque town of Guernica. The attack was carried out in support of General Franco's nationalist forces. It was one of the worst atrocities of the Spanish Civil War. Picasso responded to the massacre by painting the large anti-war mural, Guernica. And he also made a number of additional paintings of a figure from the mural, a woman holding her dead child, and a weeping woman. This one is the last of the series. This figure is based on artist and photographer Dora Maar, who documented the making of Guernica. In 1914, conflict broke out in the Balkan Peninsula. Soon, as the result of treaties and alliances, every major power in Europe was drawn into war. Soldiers with their heads full of gallant ideas about battle rushed headlong into the most horrible death imaginable. In 1916, a group of artists waiting out the war in Chirac, in neutral Switzerland, banded together as a protest art movement called Dada. And Dada was anti-art, anti-middle class society, anti-politicians, anti-good manners, anti-business as usual, anti-all that had brought about the war. In that sense, Dada was big no. But Dada was also big yes. Yes to creativity, to life, to silliness, to spontaneity. So Marcel Duchamp was a French-American painter, sculptor, chess player, and writer whose work is associated with Cubism, Dada, and conceptual art. So this work is widely regarded as a modernist classic and has become one of the most famous of its time. Before its first presentation at the 1912 Salon des Indépendants in Paris, it was rejected by the Cubists as being too futurist. And, we know what it is, right? It's ready-made. The ready-made of Marcel Duchamp was ordinary manufactured objects that the artist subjected and modified as an antidote to what he called retinal art by simply choosing the object or objects and repositioning or joining, titling, and signing it. The found object became art. And the next art movement we are going to see is Surrealism. Surrealism was formulated in Paris in the 1920s. Like Dada, Surrealism was not a style, but a way of life. So fascinated by the theories of the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who was then setting out his revolutionary ideas in Vienna, the surrealists appreciated the power of dream, that mystery of the unconscious and the lure of the bizarre, and the irrational, the incongruous, and the marvelous. So I'm going to show you two surrealist artists after the avant-garde. So this is the first artist, Salvador Dali. So Dali was a Spanish surrealist artist. Dali was a skilled draftsman, best known for the striking and bizarre images in his work. And his painterly skills are often attributed to the influence of Renaissance masters. So let's see his work of art. So it looks like very, dream, right? And very mysterious, even though he is showing very perfect skill to, draw, but still the story looks like very mysterious. The title is The Persistence of Memory. So this painting is created in 1931 by Dali, and one of the most recognizable works of surrealism. The iconography may refer to a dream that Dali himself had experienced, and the clocks, the clocks here, may symbolize the passing of time as one experiences it in sleep, or the persistence of time in the eyes of the dreamer. The orange clock here at the bottom left corner of this painting, and it is covered by ants. And ants, which is a common theme in Dali's work, and it represents decay, particularly when they attack a gold watch and they seem grotesquely organic. And the monstrous flesh creature here, draped across the painting center, is at once alien and familiar. An approximation of Dali's own face in profile. So this is nose and this is eyelash. So its long eyelashes seem disturbingly insect-like or even sexual, as does what may or may not be a tongue oozing from its nose like a fat snail. So I'm going to share a video to see this painting closer.
At the Museum of Modern Art, there is this tiny painting by Salvador Dali, which is the painting that everybody wants to see. That and Starry Night by Van Gogh are the two stars. And I thought it would be really interesting to talk about why this painting is so wildly popular. So this is The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali.
And here, I understand why people kind of connect to it now. I mean, anybody who's ever tried to make an album for a rock band is inspired by Salvador Dali. There's also this kind of fun of what are you looking at? He's really playing with reality, and it's kind of like a visual brain teaser.
Is that it? Is it so popular? Is it on album cover art because it's this attack on the rational, and that's such a seductive idea?
Yeah, it's mind trippy. I like the way you phrase it. It's an attack on the rational. I mean, I guess there might be more to it. That's my sense.
You were talking about album cover art and posters on, maybe a dorm room. And what's interesting is that these artists took these ideas really seriously. This was surrealism. This was painted in 1931. Dali, this Spanish artist, this Catalan artist, had just come to Paris and had joined the surrealist group.
I'm assuming he's considered significant because he was the first person to essentially do dreamscapes and these, as you mentioned, attack on the rational.
When you walk into this painting and visually, you enter into this really deep, open, and lonely space. And it's this really quiet image.
Yeah, it's kind of this desert scape. Ignoring the melting clocks for a moment, you feel that, okay, if you were in this landscape, yes, time really does not really carry a lot of weight. You could just kind of wither there and die and no one would care. Even that kind of water in the background, there's no waves in it. It's like they've had time to settle down. There's literally no activity.
There's this unbearable sense of quiet. There is almost no movement, and I think it does feel very desert-like and very hot. Literally, time has melted, right? But we have this absurd environment. We do have this very naturalistic rendering, but the things that are being rendered are not naturalistic at all. You mentioned the dead tree on the left, but it's growing out of something that seems clearly man-made or at least geometric, a tabletop perhaps. You have ants that seem to be eating and attracted to a piece of metal as opposed to a piece of rotted flesh.
Oh, that's what that is. I couldn't fully make it out. Okay, so they're eating away at a timepiece. That's fascinating.
And of course, you have the drooping clocks. And that's such an interesting and evocative idea because time is something that is so regimented. Time is something that rules us, that is so associated with the industrial culture that we live in. And here, it responds to the environment as we respond to the environment.
Well, one, you have that tabletop, and there's another one in the background. And even the way that the light is set up, especially in that cliff, it looks like it's sunset. So it's kind of like, hey, just another day has passed. Who cares?
Now, there are some identifiable things. I mean, for all of the absurdity and for all of the impossibility of what we're seeing, there are some things that art historians have recognized. The cliffs in the back are, we think, the cliffs of the Catalonian coast in northern Spain where Dali is from. And so this is his childhood, perhaps. Some art historians have concluded that that strange figure, almost a profile face, can you just make out an eye with extremely long lashes and perhaps a tongue under a nose?
This is the whole optical illusion part of Dali. Yeah, I thought it was like a blanket, but now I completely see the eyelashes. I thought it was a duck for a second too. I see the eyelashes and the top of a nose.
Yeah, Dali does that funny thing where one object can actually be several things at once, sometimes really convincingly. Some art historians think this is his face, but elusive and very much a kind of dream.
I mean, that goes back into the category of this is more of that kind of door move, optical illusion type art.
Well, that's right. Surrealism posited that the rational world that we have so much faith in was perhaps not worthy of all of that faith, that the irrational was just as important, but was something that we had sublimated, something that we had tried to drive out of our life. And the way that these artists and writers thought about it was if only they could retrieve the world of the dream. Some of the artists had read Freud. Some of them had only heard sort of secondhand accounts of Freud. But the idea that the dream was a place where the irrational mind came to the fore unrestricted.
This is something that I guess often confronts me is even the notions that how we perceive what we think as objective reality is really based on how our brain is wired. We see these causes and effects. We see linear time. This is how humans are wired. I mean, I think that's what's fun about these type of things. It kind of said, well, look, there's different forms of reality, and who are we as creatures that are wired one particular way to be all that judgmental about what's real?
When people have looked at this painting, they have sometimes, and I think unconvincingly, tried to link it to Einstein's earlier ideas of the
time dilation and
exactly. And the time was not, in fact, a strict thing. But I think there's more evidence that Dali is thinking about ideas of a philosopher whose name is Bergson, who thought about time as something that was not simply what struck on a clock, but that there was a kind of human time that was more subjective and that expanded and contracted according to our experience.
Time is this thing that sometimes scares us because we completely don't understand it, even though it's some kind of the most fundamental component of our existence. We fundamentally don't understand it, and we try to measure it out. We try to constrain it, define it in some way that makes sense to us. Yeah, actually, I think that's what this piece is maybe trying to do. Is that look, these clocks are stupid. These are just our futile attempts to try to label. It's kind of like if you label something or if you measure something, you feel like you actually understand it, even though you don't.
I think this is that moment when all those safe ideas of objectivity are being blown out of the water. And we're seeing an art that is, in some really interesting ways, confronting that.
All right. Let's see. Another surrealist artist, Rene Magritte. So, Rene Magritte was a Belgian surrealist artist, and he became well known for creating several witty and thought-provoking images, often depicting ordinary subjects in an unusual context. His work is known for challenging observers' preconditioned perceptions of reality. So this is his work. Looks very interesting, right? So this piece depicts a scene of Raining Man. Now we can see a Raining Man here, nearly identical to each other, dressed in dark overcoats and bowler hats, and who seem to be either falling down like raindrops, floating up like helium balloons, or just stationed in the middle air as no movement or motion is implied. The backdrop features the red roofed buildings and mostly blue part cloudy sky, lending credence to the theory that the men are not raining. Many of the surrealist artists are interested in masks, disguises, and what lies beyond or beneath visible surfaces, like the Rene Magritte, this painting. Surrealism offered a personal solution to life during the years following the trauma of World War I, but in the view of many artists, the society and possibly even human nature itself had to be transformed so that such a horror would not happen again. That art could play a central role in bringing about a better society was a 19th century idea, yet it found renewed application after World War I in a collective approach. So in the arts, idealism encourages imagination and attempts to realize a mental conception of beauty, a standard of perfection juxtaposed to aesthetic naturalism and realism. The artist of this title reduced art to essential geometric shapes and primary colors, believing that these were a universally understood visual language. The most famous artist associated with this title was Piet Mondrian. So this is the artist. Piet Mondrian is a Dutch painter, and he is known for being one of the pioneers of 20th century abstract art, as he changed his artistic direction from figurative painting to an increasingly abstract style until he reached a point where his artistic vocabulary was reduced to simple geometric elements. Mondrian's art was highly utopian and was concerned with a search for universal values and aesthetic. This is his work. As the years progressed, lines began to take precedence over forms in Mondrian's paintings. In the 1930s, he began to use thinner lines and double lines more frequently, punctuated with a few small colorless forms, if any at all. Double lines particularly excited Mondrian, for he believed that offered his paintings a new dynamism, which he was eager to explore. So I'm gonna share a video to see his Pierre Mondrian's work of art in detail and how he could create this idealism style of work.
These bold colors and grids are the hallmark of artist Piet Mondrian. But the same artist, still known today for his instantly recognizable patterns, started out painting these. This summer, an exhibit at the Gemeente Museum in The Hague traces Mondrian's path from that to this. Benno Temple, the museum's director, explains.
So in the Netherlands there has always been a very strong tradition in landscape painting, dating back from the 17th century. And it was almost a golden rule. The horizon was low, so you had 1/3 of the painting being a landscape and 2/3 of the painting being sky with the famous Dutch clouds.
But even in his early career, Mondrian is ready to break the rules.
He has this early painting around 1900, a ditch by a farm. A landscape with the horizon very high, so there's almost no sky. And there is a tree standing in the foreground of the painting, dividing the painting into, you could almost say, squares and lines.
In 1911, Mondrian moves to Paris, where the Cubist painters Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso influenced Mondrian to experiment with increasingly abstract styles. In 1915, Mondrian returns to the Netherlands and joins the Laren Artist Colony, where he befriends two artists who push him even further toward abstraction. Together, these three participate in the founding of the De Stijl movement. Like many artistic movements at the time, this group tried to make a definite break from the past. No more Dutch clouds and windmills for these guys. Mondrian calls his style at this time neoplasticism. Mondrian writes,
"This new plastic idea will ignore the particulars of appearance. On the contrary, it should find its expression in the abstraction of form and color, that is to say, in the straight line in the clearly defined primary color."
It all boils down to straight lines and primary colors, the signature Mondrian look you see in stores and on runways today. But despite how far Mondrian's style evolved from Dutch landscapes, it's still possible to see a connection to his early works.
Although they're completely different, one is figurative, the other is abstract. You see that it's almost the same division of picture planes. And that's not done on purpose, it's done by intuition.
All right, so that's it for today. We have a discussion related to the chapter, what we just learned. Give me 1 second, everyone.
Professor,
Yep.
I was so happy for a minute thinking that we won't have discussion today.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So let me share today's discussion soon, shortly. Second. So, but today's discussion topic is not that hard. So you will see, each art movements, the artists' videos in this discussion page. please watch all of these videos after this meeting. Maybe some of the videos, I just shared in the meeting, and most of them you didn't watch it yet. So please watch them after this meeting. And then here's the topic. So, we have been suffering from COVID-19 now so far, and the virus has changed our lives. Some scholars said that the stress from COVID-19 is just the same as the world wars. So there are diverse art movements during the world wars in 19th and 20th centuries. So artists showed their physical and psychological wound through their arts in a variety of ways. So which art style or artist work is representing your feeling in this pandemic crisis? So choose one of the modern art movement or artists and tell us why it represents your feeling. So that's